Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community.
Good morning and welcome to Money Sense. I'm your host, Neville Hicks, alongside Christophe Barnett.
Good morning.
We have, it's hard to believe, I think we've been doing this show for a year and a half, and we haven't had, I guess, what we would consider CFA's cousin, the Kaya designation group on. They do a they're tremendously relevant to Cayman, given the size of the alternative space here, the fact that it employs a number of people, and not only that, the contribution to GDP within the financial services. So with that, we're absolutely thrilled to have on with us Dr. Keith Black, Kaya CFA and Managing Director of Curriculums and Exams at the Kaya Association. Welcome, Keith.
Great to be here.
And with us, locally based, we also have Jeffrey Goddard, who's also Kaya and executive member of the team here at the local chapter. So welcome.
Thank you, Neville. Pleasure to be here.
And Keith, I understand, Keith's based in Amherst, Massachusetts, and I understand they're getting around 18 inches of snow there, so he's probably a little bit thrilled. You're probably a little bit thrilled to be here with us in Cayman.
It's always nice to be on island. I travel globally about a quarter of the time, but this is one of my favorite places in the world to come, and if it's in February, it's even better.
Perfect. Well, we're glad you're here. So when we I guess we talk about, Jeff and I were discussing, Kaya and CFA, and we were talking a little bit about the cousin. What, I guess for our audience, what is the Kaya designation, and can you explain a little bit about that? And Keith, feel free to jump in there as well.
Sure, absolutely. So Kaya stands for Chartered Alternative Investment Analysts, and it's a professional designation for specialists in alternative investments. So these are industry practitioners servicing hedge funds, private equity funds, and really looking at investments that are outside of the more traditional stocks and bonds. Mm-hmm. And in the Cayman context, it's particularly relevant because of our dominance in the hedge fund space. And it also covers things like commodities and structured products. If you look back, say, 10 to 15 years, many of the service providers here actually rename some of their businesses to focus on SPVs, which are structured products. And we feel that Kaya is uniquely positioned in terms of offering education for industry practitioners that's very relevant to Cayman.
Great.
So we have an expert-level program, as Jeff said, in alternative investments. We offer a Level 1 exam and a Level 2 exam you can take here on island. It's about a one-year program, 400 hours of study. But once you finish that, you have an expert-level credential that's very relevant to your day-to-day job as well as your progression within the job market.
Great. So if I'm someone sitting back listening to this show, if I think about Kaya, I think about an educational program that's really specific to the alternatives industry itself.
That's right.
Yeah.
And often we try to talk about the CFA Society and CFA charter holders themselves. So how would you say, what are the similarities and then what are the differences between the two designations? So because the CFA designation isn't just another designation within the professional industry.
Right. So what we see is that the Kaya designation is about half of the effort and the time as the CFA program. But there's some commonalities. So in our program, we use the CFA Standards of Practice Handbook. So if CFA members or candidates are familiar with the CFA Ethics program, that's also included in the Kaya program. We also have a common core of statistics and portfolio theory, some of that. But then we go much deeper into each of these areas of alternative investments. So in fact, we have thousands of CFA members and candidates around the world who are also participating in the Kaya program.
And so how long has the program been around for? If you look at investing, alternatives haven't been around, I guess, for very long in the context of, if you look at stocks or bonds. How long has Kaya, and how did it come about? What was the rationale or reason for it?
Right. So Kaya started, its first exam was in 2003. I'm in the first class of 43 members.
Okay.
And now we have almost 9,000 members in 90 countries around the world, with just about half of them in the Americas. And so we do have a global footprint, both in Europe and in Asia. But 10 years ago, we think there's maybe $4 trillion US of assets under management in the alternative space. And we just recounted a few weeks ago, we think there's about $98 trillion in the world in what we call traditional wealth, which is stocks and bonds and cash. And now it's almost $15 trillion in alternative investments. And so over the last 15 years, we've seen that alternative piece grow by a factor of 4. And so a lot of money's come into this alternative space.
And what are alternatives? So we've sort of jumped around and danced around, what it is. And Jeff mentioned that it's not stock and bonds, which again you just repeated, Keith. But maybe give some more examples. You mentioned commodities, structured products. But if I'm an alternative investor, what do I buy or what do I trade?
So I'll talk about kind of the real assets and the structured products, and maybe Jeff can address the hedge funds and the private equity. And so one thing that's interesting about alternative investments is that they're not stocks and bonds. So if you think about investing in currency, if you think about investing in real estate or commodities, we could tell that these are fundamentally different assets than stocks and bonds. And that's the goal, is to do something different in our portfolio, because we're all about diversification. Mm-hmm. And one of the goals of diversification is to have a gain in one of our assets, maybe when another one of our assets is losing money. So in managed futures in 2008, which is kind of a hedge fund strategy, that strategy increased in value by 18% in 2008, even though you saw significant declines in the stock and bond markets. And so what we're looking to do is access markets that are different than stocks and bonds, whether it's in structured products, where maybe you could buy insurance against your bond portfolio, or investing in infrastructure or farmland, something that we see as a hard asset. You could touch it, you could see it, you understand where the cash comes from. That feels inherently different to us than stocks and bonds. And with bond yields where they are, people are really attracted to owning some of these hard assets that have a nice cash flow yield.
Yeah, and just building on what Keith has already mentioned, here in Cayman, when we think about alternative investments, we typically think about hedge funds, private equity funds, structured products. But there are also some other assets or asset classes that can be invested in. We've seen investors place money in art, in timberland, which are forests, which you then get revenue from in terms of selling to paper manufacturers, for example. People invest in seeds, people invest in diamonds. So they're the types of things that we're talking about. So it's not as common as your traditional investments, which would be in stocks and bonds.
Mm-hmm. But in terms of the industry of Cayman, this is critically important, because I would say a large majority of the finance professionals and the support industry surrounding is involved in the alternative industry. Is that not correct?
Absolutely. And I think, sitting here in Cayman, we often lose sight of that, right? Because many of the folks working in the legal industry, in the accounting industry, they're servicing hedge funds, right? Mm-hmm. That's the number one product from the Cayman perspective. So for us, it's not seen as an alternative vehicle, but in the grand scheme of things, it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Cayman is the world's leader in hedge fund administration and hedge fund domicile. And over 80% of the hedge funds in the world are domiciled in Cayman, U.S., Ireland, and Luxembourg. And Cayman could be the largest of those 4 domiciles in the hedge fund business.
So I find that interesting. We tossing around the word trillion. If we've seen that go, if we look at the world, the global wealth, I guess, as you define it, and just round it up to 100 trillion, that's increased fourfold in the alternative space to about 15 trillion. What's really driven that change, or why? That seems like a sharp kind of uptick. And is that momentum going to continue, Keith?
I believe it is, and so if you look at the growth, I think that hedge funds, private equity, and real estate have gone from $4 trillion to 12, 13 trillion. So it's been a 3 times growth in those kind of traditional alternative asset classes. But where we've really seen the growth recently is in real assets and in liquid alternatives. And so 10 years ago, you couldn't really count the amount of institutional assets invested in commodities, infrastructure, farmland, and timberland. And now that's $1 trillion business worldwide, up from something you couldn't even count 10 years ago. What's also interesting is we've historically thought that alternative investments were for institutional investors or high net worth individuals. But again, since 2008, the world's really changed, and there's been a big growth in what's called the liquid alternatives business. They could be domiciled in Europe under the UCITS format or in the U.S. under the 40 Act format. But these are basically mutual funds or exchange-traded funds that are available to any investor around the world with maybe just $1,000 to invest. And so now this is an $800 billion business, again, up from almost nothing in 2008. And people really like being able to access these products, because if you only look at the mutual fund business, if the stock market isn't doing well, if the bond market isn't doing well, you'd want to be able to look elsewhere to be able to protect yourself and be slightly defensive. And so maybe adding a managed futures mutual fund or exchange-traded product into your portfolio would be a great hedge.
So not only then in the ETF world, exchange-traded fund that I can buy in a stock brokerage account, not only can I buy the Vanguard index fund, let's say, that owns the broad U.S. stock market, but there are products out there where, if I'm so inclined, I can buy real estate or timberland or hedge fund strategies. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. And so in this mutual fund format, you have the ability to buy commodities, managed futures, long-short equity funds, and REITs, real estate investment trusts, which are exchange-traded packages of physical real estate. But one thing you can't really access are these less liquid areas. So it's difficult to invest in private equity in a daily traded liquid alternative structure because it's inherently illiquid.
Certainly.
And how do the fees compare on those versus the traditional hedge funds where you have to invest maybe monthly and wait for the end of month price?
Right. So in hedge funds, you might pay a fee of 1 in 10 or 2 in 20. So it's a management fee of 1 or 2% of your assets every year, and then the hedge fund manager might take 10 or 20% of the gains. Some people think those fees are high, but other people say I need to look at the return net of fees, and if that manager is very talented and gives me a high return, then those fees are the cost of doing business. But this is another attraction to the liquid alternative business, where if you think that fees of 2 and 20 are relatively high, a lot of these exchange-traded products have fees on the order of 1.5%, which might not be very different than you'd find in some traditional mutual fund products.
Great. Thanks, Keith. We're going to take a quick break, but join us in about 30 seconds and we'll continue this interesting discussion on alternatives and how you can invest in them and what impact it has here on the local market.
This is
Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community. Brought to you by the CFA Society Cayman Islands and sponsored by OneTradeX.
And now, more Money Sense.
Good morning and welcome back to Money Sense. I'm your host, Neville Hicks, alongside Christoph Barnett.
Good morning.
We're in studio with Dr. Keith Black, CFA, Kaya, PhD, and Managing Director of Curriculum and Exams at the Kaya Association, and Jeffrey Goddard, Executive Committee member here with Kaya. We've kind of spent the first show highlighting what the alternative industry is, the size of it. It's 15 trillion, which is a big number. But taking it back locally here, Jeff, what is the local Kaya chapter really about, and how many members do you guys have here?
Right, thanks, Neville. That's a great question. We formed the local chapter in 2015, so we had our official launch in May 2015 after working and receiving lots of support from the Kaya Association, which is based in Massachusetts, USA, and various local companies which have offered sponsorship and resources to us. And really what we're aiming to do is promote awareness of the Kaya chapter. So we're approaching roughly 100 members and candidates on island, and those numbers we believe to be a bit low in terms of the officially reported stats, because we have many people who've recently come to the island who are Kaya members who've qualified overseas, but they haven't re-registered on the Kaya site as being in Cayman.
So they live here and work here, but
we still think they live in Canada.
Right.
Exactly. So we're working on the statistics, but generally what we're aiming to achieve here is to assist Kaya members and candidates with getting access to continuing educational opportunities. So we host several events each year where we bring in a speaker from overseas. We have officials coming down from the Kaya Association, such as Dr. Black, to work with local companies, local universities, and doing presentations for the industry at large. For example, next week, Tuesday evening at the Marriott at 6 o'clock, we have a speaker who's come in from the US who will be talking to us about risk management for hedge funds. That's an event that's free. It's open to all industry practitioners or just people who are interested in risk management for their own portfolios. And we'd love to see people come out, attend. That presentation will also be followed by a networking event, which is always well received as well.
Good. And we definitely we'll touch on that a little. I think at the end of the show we'll just give people a little reminder too. But on the exam side, so can people write? It's 2 exams. It's still quite a heavy curriculum load, relatively speaking. 200 hours per exam. Can they write it in Cayman, and what time of year can they write it, or how do they go to the Kaya website to sign up? How does that look, or how does someone who's listening go, I'm interested in learning more?
Right. So our website is kaya.org, CAIA.org, and you'd see the registration process there for the exam. Exams are offered here on island at UCCI in March and September. Might be a little late to get started on your March exam, but registration opens for the September exam in early April. You'd see the registration information there. And it's been great how Jeff has this relationship with UCCI. And helps them keep the exam center open to access opportunities on island, because there's been times where you had to travel to the U.S. or elsewhere to sit for your exam.
Yeah, and I think that's one of our main objectives as the local chapters, to make things easy for people. Mm-hmm. We've also worked with local bookstores to ensure that books are available locally. We've also been fortunate enough to have live tuition being offered here on island. Keith actually came down and offered the fundamentals course, which is a new one, live here in Cayman, and we were the first place in the world where that was offered.
Okay.
So you said that it's a big job to sit for Kaya Level 1 and Kaya Level 2 or CFA. It's a big personal commitment.
Yeah.
And not everyone needs that 400 hours or that 900 hours of professional education in traditional investments or alternative investments. But what we've done with the Fundamentals of Alternative Investments program is it's a 20-hour continuing education program. So if you're a member of CFP, if you're a member of IMCA, if you have a U.S. CPA designation and you need continuing education credits, you can access the fundamentals course to earn 20 hours. And so what we do with the fundamentals course is it's all online. You could access it on your own time. You watch a 1-hour video, you take a 10-question quiz, and it's meant for everyone to pass. It's meant to be a very accessible, less rigorous program. that gives you the structure of the industry without a lot of the math, without a lot of the rigor. So anyone who's involved or even interested in alternative investments could access the fundamentals program, and you could finish that program in just a couple of months, just a couple hours a week.
So, Jeff, we like to remind our listeners again of the importance of the finance industry in Cayman, and sometimes we take it for granted that we have such a high level of professional expertise, both in the expat population and local Caymanians such as ourselves. So maybe you could just touch on your members and the jobs that they do, because I think sometimes this gets lost and people don't realize, oh wait, my cousin is a Kaya member, my brother is, my uncle, my aunt, my sister. And so maybe you can touch on what jobs do Kaya members do in Cayman?
Yes, that's a good question, Christoph. So in terms of our membership base, we have the usual suspects. The larger employers in Cayman for the industry would be the accounting firms, the law firms. But we're also seeing a number of Kaya members working in governance, which is a growing area. We also have members who are in the fund administration space. And I think, having people who are qualified to a global standard is fantastic for Cayman. It helps ensure that we provide the level of service that the investors need, that clients want, that employers are desiring to offer. And when we can demonstrate that we have people locally who are qualified at a global standard, it helps us compete with those jurisdictions onshore. One of the things that I always refer to is I used to be involved with a sales effort for a former employer, and one of the questions that we would typically get was, can you list out all the people that you have on staff with professional designations? And that encompasses people with CPAs, CFAs, Kaya, or risk management qualifications. So the more you can show, the better chance you have of winning business and being successful. And overall, as a jurisdiction, it helps raise the bar in terms of the service that we can offer and raises our legitimacy worldwide as well.
Maybe Keith, you can add to that. So when you come to Cayman and you see the level of professional qualification, like how does that compare to some of the other places that you visit,
right.
or even the U.S.?
Right. So Kaya's in 90 countries, and we have 28 chapters around the world. We do about 150 events a year, and so we do get around. I travel a lot as well as our CEO, Bill Kelly, and we're always impressed with Cayman, especially on the legal side. I think that the financial literacy of attorneys in Cayman is basically unmatched wherever you go in the world. And we think that because you have this concentration of business, you have this culture of alternative investments, you have these continuing education opportunities on island, all contributes to this very high level of professionalism here on island.
And with the Kaya gaining more and more momentum, is it in the alternative space, is it becoming the benchmark as far as either what employers are demanding of employees?
I think Kaya
or is that the goal?
Kaya is a global benchmark for alternative investment education. I think more broadly, CFA is seen as the gold standard for investment education, and both designations are actually complementary. So you see many members that have the Kaya charter also are CFA charter holders. Kaya really adds an additional tool to your tool chest, and in Cayman that tool is very important in terms of the products that we service. And
we have a job board that you could access on our website at kaya.org, and we're seeing an increasing number of employers around the world require or suggest the Kaya credential alongside a CFA or an MBA or an accounting degree or a law degree as part of the requirements of that position. And it could be on the buy side, it could be on the sell side, could be with service providers, could be with regulators. We're seeing a lot of these organizations come to respect and require the Kaya for the people they hire and promote in their organizations.
And are you seeing that as well locally, Jeff, as far as the employer outreach here or employers, whether they're in accounting or supporting services within the alternative space, say to their employees, oh, you guys should consider this. This is really, from an alternatives perspective, something that's going to add value to your underlying clients? Absolutely,
Neville. What we're seeing is, as we, for example, take officials like Keith into employers and we help educate them on what Kaya is all about, we measure our success when we see their job ads change to also include Kaya as a designation that's approved and something that they're looking for in terms of their employees. That is creating the demand, and we're also on the other side working with institutions like UCCI to ensure that testing centers are available, books are available through local bookstores to help create the supply. We would love to continue to generate more value for the local community, and we plan to continue to do that through local events and the ongoing efforts that we have to form partnerships with other industry players.
Great, fantastic. And it seems, I know when I first started this CFA curriculum, it seemed a lot smaller than when I finished it. Dr. Black, you're the head of curriculum at Kaya. Is this something that's similar to the U.S. tax code and just constantly increasing, or are you taking out relevant? I guess we're in a dynamic world now,
right? And that's what's exciting about alternative investments. It is dynamic, and part of my job is to stay as current and as relevant as we can. So we published a brand new Level 1 textbook in September 2015. Published a brand new Level 2 textbook in September of 2016, and now at the end of this year we have to start Level 1 all over again. Right. And so it is this dynamic process. But if you look at just relative to 3 years ago, there's a big change in the structured products markets. There's more assets that have come in to the real asset space, and liquid alternatives is much bigger. And so we're constantly looking at these type of issues. We're always looking at emerging issues. So right now we're discussing what are we doing with environmental investing, and that started to come into the program in a small weight, and we're looking at that as one of the hot new topics that may increase in weight in the future.
Well, there's no question the alternative space in Kaya is certainly relevant to Cayman, so we want to thank you, and maybe I'll just toss it over to Jeff quickly to summarize the upcoming event, and we hope our listeners can make it out to it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Neville and Christoph. Great opportunity for us to be here today. Again, we'd like to invite everyone out to the Marriott on Feb 14th next week to attend our networking event and educational event. We have an international speaker who will be presenting on risk management, and we'd like to see everyone there.
Great. And on a final note, before we leave, I want to again thank our listeners for joining us today. You can hear this as a podcast on the CFA Society Cayman webpage, and we encourage anyone who has a topic or question to let us know. You can email us at moneysense@canw.ky. We also have a Twitter handle that's at MoneySense Radio, so post your questions there. If you have any questions about Kaya or alternative space, feel free to send that in and we can get that answered in the following weeks. So with that, goodbye, and we look forward to speaking to you again in 2 weeks. Thank you very much.